don't even know what to do with that.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. It's great to be here. You want to start now?
I don't know.
We had two guys went looking for Bill.
There were a couple guys that went looking for you, Bill, and they didn't come back.
I'll circle out there and send them your way.
Okay, they can.
That you're getting cranked up.
Right.
Theoretically, you've got an hour, but there's nothing after you, so you do whatever you want.
We're the very last.
Get done late, don't care.
Okay. All right. We're here we're awesome. Hey, thank you. Appreciate that. So, I am Steve, and this is Ben, otherwise known as Frsky Steve and Frsky Ben on Facebook. Also, I'm starting the Frsky Steve channel on YouTube. So, a bunch of different training videos. Thanks, everybody. Big enough. Where's everyone from before we get started?
Seattle.
Just yell out. Seattle? All right, we got more guys showing up. Awesome. They're the ones we're waiting for.
We were observing fiberglass.
You were observing fiberglass?
Seminar.
Oh, okay. I love that. You got the radio case and everything. Take a seat. This class is in session right now.
Sorry, we're late.
No problem. Took us a minute to get everything working anyways, so.
I was just saying, I'm Steve, this is Ben with Frsky. People ask us who we work for. Do we work for a distributor? Do we work for one of the retailers? No, we actually work for the company itself. Ben and I work for the owners of the company. There's a North American division located in Brea, California. It's also a service center and our distribution point for Frsky North America. So we pretty much, there's really isn't people quite like us elsewhere in the company. So we interface with the end users. And then pretty much what I do is I go to events pretty much round the clock. Cool. Thanks, guys. Awesome. Ron's here.
Oh, no.
Ron Gaynor. I love that. Take a seat. So yeah, I was just saying that we worked for the actual manufacturers for Frsky, and so when we get feedback, it goes directly to management. And what we tried to do is work on things as quickly as possible. What we're trying to do is make the best possible quality product. We do appreciate that you take your time and go out and fly with Frsky and tell your friends about it. And that's been a very positive impact for it. So whenever there's an issue, we take it very seriously. We try to find remedies for it. And we're trying to make things better all the time. Essentially what's happened, I'll let you speak in a second here, Ben.
No worries. Keep on.
Let me know.
No worries.
All right. If I'm talking too much, just hit me. No, what's happened with Ethos in particular, Ethos is a ground-up reboot. People ask, why are the radios so quick, so fast? Is it running in Android? No, it's written in C++ from the ground up. This was, at one point, the main core developer for OpenTX was asked, what do we do with OpenTX? Do we take it to the next generation to work with these new microcontrollers? The problem is the code base isn't going to work. And he said, this thing is it needs a lot of work. And because it needs a lot of work, we need to start from the ground up. And what happened from that point on was we looked at Ethos as trying to measure up to OpenTX. We tried to make it as good as where we left off with OpenTX. And that has been the hardest thing for us to do. It's taken us about 2.5 years to get to this point right now, maybe a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But right now, it is a very compelling operating system for the transmitters. What I will tell you about working with Ethos is this. When you buy these radios, people get these things and they're like, I met these guys at an event and they said that they really like the radios, or they met Frsky Steve and he sold me a radio. And I figured, what the hell? It's cheap enough, I'm going to buy it. It looks great. And then about a week later, it's like, oh my God, I hate this effing thing. I want to destroy it with a hammer. I mean, I would ask my money back, but this thing is evil. Okay. All right, Jim. This is great. This is like everybody. This feels just like school because. Hey, Jim, what time do they start in Rhode Island? No, I'm joking.
5 minutes after you say this. Thanks
for being late, guys. You're now the new ones that are buying drinks for everyone.
No, so, yeah, I was just saying there's the 4 stages of Frsky. The first stage is cheap enough. I like it. Looks like fun. The second stage is I effing hate this thing. I would ask for my money back, but knowing that someone else will buy it is bad enough. I need to destroy it with a hammer. Third week is I'm starting to watch videos. I'm starting to understand it. I'm getting this now. It's actually kind of cool. And the fourth week is like you're at the flying field, showing everyone the radio, showing everyone what you could do with it, and you freaking love this thing. Yeah, so that's kind of it. What we wanted to do today was take you through the whole, more or less, I want to get people comfortable, not really so much with the finding things like every nitty-gritty detail, but I want to give people an overview of how the radio system works so that you have an opportunity to maybe understand the structure, the architecture of Ethos, and get a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah. So just a quick question. Are you guys new to Frsky with the Ethos radio systems, or have any of you used our previous generation systems that were running OpenTX? Everybody's open. So we've got a few old OpenTX users. So as Steve mentioned earlier, we've been spending a lot of time to bring Ethos up to what we call feature parity with OpenTX, so that basically every feature that you had in OpenTX is available in Ethos. With our latest version 1.5, we've pretty much reached feature parity. The big thing that everybody was asking for was variables, global vars. They're a very powerful function in that you can, just like an algebra variable, you can have this X or Y condition where it can be adjusted by various programming on the radio, programming options. The most common programming thing that you're going to want to use it for is for like gain adjustments or trimming adjustments, things like that. So we've also added in a lot of new features with 1.5 that a lot of people are kind of holding off on updating, but you really kind of need to just look at what new features are available and whether it's worth it. If you used it in OpenTX, you would need to consider updating to the newest version so that you have those additional features that we've added in.
And then one of the first things we're going to go into is fixing, because this is driving Cindy nuts, so I'm going to go in and fix it right away. Let's get the lights off really quick. This is We're going to start off with settings. So settings can either be SYS over here or this icon. This is only up on the main screen. You hit the gear icon. And then the first thing I go into typically is when you have new radios to set it up. We can go into general. At the very bottom, it's just one of those things where you go to the top. Here we go again.
You want me to drive the computer while you talk?
Yeah, why don't you? All right, at the very bottom, where you can't see right here, you have sleep mode brightness. We're going to turn the sleep mode brightness up a little bit. So this is the thing we're going to do so that when it falls asleep, it's still not quite so dim. And we wake up with keys. At the very bottom, there's a thing, people ask, how do you change this at the top right here? Because this is what default looks like.
Yeah. And personally, I don't like the icons up at the top of the screen. To me, I don't really know what 2 battery bars mean. So one of the first things that we like to do with the radios is change them to be digital readings so that you get your actual voltage input, voltage for the radio, and then also the RSSI values for the radio.
You can close all these things down.
So
What is full voltage there?
it would be 8.4 volts. It's a 2-cell battery.
All right.
What I've got.
So the first thing it shows this USB mode pre-selection, I usually go in here and I switch it over to Ethos Suite. What this means is when you plug the radio in, it will go right into Ethos Suite. Select model at power on, I find that really annoying.
That's a new feature with 1.5.
Right, so this is where you turn on the digital voltage. You see at the top, there's a number right there. And then all of a sudden, this shows RS at the very top right here. It shows RSSI and everything else. So what's nice about this, we can close this down. Typically, when people have an issue, it's with audio. So voice 1 needs to be switched over to US. And that's kind of the main thing. What that is, that now it will recognize, if people say, oh, my voice has disappeared, it's usually there. You want to drop off all of your sound files into that directory. It's in audio, something, EN, and then US. Yeah. And then that's the place to put it into. All right. So the next thing what we do is hit return, get out of here.
Can you explain the select model at power on?
Yeah, so that means when you power up your radio, it's going to go right into the model select screen. So you can select which model you're going to fly every time you put your radio on. I also find that pretty annoying. I just like to, even if I'm not going to fly the model that I had flown last time, I like to go into the model select and actually just move around because...
About the only other things I play with is if you go back into here, date and time, I switch off the 24-hour time and put it onto that's a 12-hour time clock with AM and PM. You can leave the seconds on. I usually put the date in. And that's about it. Anything else you would add on that screen?
Not on the date and time screen, but back on the general screen.
Okay.
One of the things that I like to change on the radio is the audio. So scroll down a little bit more. Nope,
don't want to do that. I'm trying to close this down.
So when you first get the radios, the audio setting is set to always. And so as you're navigating all the screens, it's just like beeping like crazy at you. And to me, it drives me absolute ballistic. So I go into audio. Oh, you just had it.
I just had it. I know. It was right back here.
You want me to drive?
You want to drive? Yeah, why don't you drive?
All right. Let's see. It might be your computer, but let's see.
Might be my computer.
So what I like to do is under the general tab, I'll go down to the audio section, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but default is not the default setting. It's usually set to always. And that's why every time you roll the scroll wheel, it's just beeping like crazy and everything. So that's one of the first things I change is I change it from always to default. And then I also do the same with the haptic mode down here as well, because it's usually set to always, and I like to change it to default. That way, it's not always just constantly shaking every time I'm scrolling through the menu system or something like that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
One question. I noticed on Ethos, your programming for the computer is a replica, obviously, of the radio.
Yes.
Unlike Companion TX. Is this a little bit more clunkier though, or is it just cool that you have one visual either for the radio or when you do it on the computer? It's a little bit more...
It is a little bit clunkier because with OpenTX Simulator, you can actually have the radio plugged in and move the sticks around, and they'll be registered by the simulator software or click the switches. With our system, it's not quite been implemented yet. So like to toggle the H switch, you would actually just hit H on the keyboard. And then to do the analog inputs like your sticks, you have to use the number keys. So it is a little more clunky than the OpenTX simulator, but since it mirrors the programming basically one-to-one, it does make programming your models a lot easier. So you can basically come in here, create a new model, and you can take that model file. If you see down at the bottom here, it'll say the file name of the model. You can copy that same model off of your computer directly onto the radio and then adjust it from there. Yeah.
All right. Anything else about system you want to get into?
So the other couple things you would want to pay attention to on system is if you ever get any kind of stick jitter or something like that, or you're not getting the full range throws of your pots, you'll want to come to the hardware area and just redo your analogs calibration. And It's what a lot of times people will do is they'll put everything to center, click calibrate, and then they start moving things around. But what you want to do is hit calibrate to start the calibration process first. Then, as it says here, center everything. So you want to make sure when it tells you to have everything centered, have all your pots and gimbals centered, and then you walk through the rest of the calibration steps here. So I'm just going to back out here because I'm not going to do that process on the simulator.
All right. Oh, we should also talk about switch settings right there.
Question in regards to when you get your radio brand new, they generate a radio ID number. It's like AB92.
That's in the model setup.
We'll get to that during model setup.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then the other thing that you'll need to pay attention to on the system settings is if you're using any of our stabilized receivers, our old stabilized receivers, or our sensor setup. That's where you would do all the device configuration for your airspeed sensors, current sensors, basically everything there. For the newer stabilized receivers, right now you do have to install what we call Lua scripts, but within the next month or so, that's all going to be rolled into this section.
Can you point out the SXR on the screen right there?
Yeah.
Those two, SXR calibration. What you're going to see is it's going to say SRX, so it'll be added in there as well. That is going to be a huge deal because asking people to load Lua scripts has been a nightmare.
Yeah.
So that way, it's going to be one less step for everyone to have to work on.
Has that already been loaded on the 1.5?
It's going to be a combination of Ethos 1.5 and also a combination of...
Because I just got the AW. Do I have to still load that load?
Yes, at the current time, you do still have to load the Lua scripts,
Right.
but hopefully within about a month is when they're planning to
and
roll
this
that
is
out.
where you will set up everything. Okay. It's in the device config. The other thing... sorry about that.
No problem.
Let's see, airspeed, gas suite. We're going to have a new gas suite, remote NFC switch. We have that variometer. So a lot of these are sensors that are set up. Exact servos. All the servos have telemetry as well. Even the SBAC. So there's a lot to this.
Yeah, and the servos are fully programmable in the sense that you can change the sweep, so you can set them from 90-degree sweep, 120-degree sweep, or 180-degree sweep. You can mechanically center them by adjusting the programming of the servo itself, so you don't have to use subtrims. You can change the pot gaps. You can change the friction. So you can really customize the way the servo performs for whatever you're doing. You can even also change the throw direction from clockwise to counterclockwise, basically, so you don't have to go in there and reverse channels. With Ethos, it's kind of like there's 4 different ways to do just about everything, and it's just a matter of knowing at what level, at what stage of the model setup and build is the best place to do that. So normally we always try to get our servos as mechanically centered as possible to reduce the amount of adjusting offsets and center trims and sub trims and all that as well. So that would be kind of at the higher level, by programming the servo directly.
Let's go to the next screen here.
Yes.
So I'm going to just show the last thing, which is the info screen. Right. This is, as you can see, we have an X20S and at the very top, and it's running Ethos 1.5.0 release candidate 7. It's time I update the Ethos suite on this PC.
The simulator.
The simulator, right. Ethos simulator. It's working with the TDM Max, and it's showing the hardware and the firmware.
Yeah. Now, these are all just simulated firmware versions because we're using the PC simulator. On your radio, the latest TD-ISRM firmware is 2.2.6. Now, a lot of people wonder what HW is. That's the hardware version. That's generally never going to change because you're not changing the internal hardware of the RF module or the actual physical hardware of the receiver. The FW is your firmware version. That's what you're pushing your downloaded updates for.
So this indicates receivers that you have programmed for every model?
Yeah, so for each model, when you have your model registered and bound up, you can come to this screen and you can bind up to 3 receivers for each model.
The receiver has to be plugged in and turned on.
Yeah, the receiver has to be plugged in and turned on, and you'll see it on here.
So this doesn't show a receiver Yeah, it does. So every time you change your model, it's also going to show all the information.
Those other receivers. Like
Yeah.
for this example, like I said, it's simulating 3 TDMXs, but on your radio, let's say you have a TDR10 and a TDMX bound up, it'll show the TDR10 and TDMX. You have another model that has a TDR18 and a TDR10, it'll show those receivers when you load that model. So,
Can you go back up to the top on that really quick? I want to
That's only for Frsky receivers.
Correct,
It won't
yeah.
show the spectrum.
No.
Or any others.
What I do when people say, you know, I had an issue, I just ask them to photograph this right here.
Yeah.
Because if I ask them, do you have the latest update? They always say yes. But
Liar.
yes, sir.
Question about updates.
I was wondering, I want to keep going through this. Can we hold off some of these questions?
Yeah, we're going to have a Q&A kind of,
Yeah.
you know, towards the last
Sorry,
part of
but yeah,
the
I
thing.
just
But
wanna keep going.
we want to roll through the
Yeah.
software overview.
This is just the hardware stuff. We want to get into helping people set up the radio. And so we're going into the next portion of this, which is the models. See the airplane icon right there? Yeah, you hit that, and that is, or you hit the MDL right there. It's the same thing. And so,
Yep. So there's 2 ways to navigate the system. You can do it using the touch buttons down here. You have your airplane, which is the model setup, the gear icon, which is your system setup, and then you can as well click the physical hardware buttons that are on the radio.
now what we're going to do is we're going to go through setting up a model really quick. This is, the best way to do this is to do a create new model. You see right there where it also says receive model? You went back through it, yeah. So you can, we showed this the other day, you can send and receive models from one transmitter to the other using Bluetooth. And then it goes like that, and we'll send it writes. Usually it works, doesn't give you a right error.
Yeah, with the simulator, we don't have a secondary one to send it, so it just gives that as
We're going to hit the big plus button, we're going to create a new model right there. Go to create model, and then airplane right there, hit next. Now this has changed. You see those 3 little dots right there? This is important. Somebody found this and he didn't know what that meant. So the question is up above, are you using a stabilized self-styled receiver from Frsky? And that was supposed to be no, but it was not very obvious. So I wrote into GitHub and I said, people are having a hard time with this because they're picking stabilized receivers, and when they don't have them, it's screwing up their models. So within about a month, we had that changed to no, I'm not, or something says no, I'm not. And then Cindy, you had something that you sent in on GitHub, and it showed up in a version, right?
When you custom color your theme, there was some colors that the text was not getting encoded, so it was hard to read some text.
Right.
And they fixed it within probably 2 weeks or less. Actually, no, they fixed it within a week. Yeah.
Within a week. So yeah, that's the whole thing about these updates with Ethos. People are like, why are they doing so many so often? They're little things they're finding along the way, and they're fixing them and making them better. All right, we're going to hit next, and we're going to look at, so right now we have a 1-channel plane. Let's have fun. The Hobby King has just released a Twin Otter. Well, let's set that plane up. I bet you, so it uses 2 channels for...
And there's 2 ways to navigate these scroll menus. You can click and drag them and try to drop it on 2 channels. You can also just click on it directly, and it'll pop up another window that you can then go in and more easily select. Sometimes when I'm dragging these around, I try to drop it on what I want, and I overshoot, and I end up with 3 channels, and so I have to go back again. So sometimes just clicking on it, letting that extra window pop up, and selecting from that secondary pop-up is a little bit easier.
Okay. So now, what this has is 2 channels for ailerons, and we're going to use 2 channels for flaps. So we have flaps. It has a traditional tail, and for fun, I'm going to say that it has 2 elevators and 1 rudder. Okay. So what it's going to give right now is giving an overview. It's showing you where everything's set up on, and just making sure you know where it's at, right? Then we hit next, and then right there we're going to say that this is going to be, say TO for Twin Otter, or you're going to type it in?
Yep.
All right, you screwed up already. Look at that.
I'm just going to call it the twin aught.
Okay. And you would select a picture if we could, and go to next.
Oops.
Okay.
I keep double clicking.
I know. It's fast. All right, so where do I plug everything in at, Ben? Now that I had something flash up a second ago, but I don't understand. Where did I plug in all my servos?
So the airplane icon is, again, you're going to be your model setup where you do everything specific to that one model. Under the mixer settings, it will have the mixes that you just basically assign during that model creation step. It'll tell you which channels are your ailerons, your elevators, your twin throttle, your rudders, and then the flaps that we assigned.
But flaps don't have something set up. Why is there a problem with it? It says no source, right?
Yep. So the source is going to be where, what switch or button which input button you're using on the radio system itself. So there's kind of two ways to do everything at least. You can click on flaps, click on edit like this, or you can just long click on flaps and it'll go right into the edit screen.
Right. So then for the input, all you do is hit Control, let's say Control D on there. It's the same as hitting SD.
You don't have to hit Control, just D.
Just D?
Yeah. So it's a little, sometimes the naming conventions are a little confusing because on the previous screen here it says the source, but here they call it, or on the edit screen, they call it the input. It's basically the same thing. The source and the input are the same.
Hey, I'm going to ask you a question. I see something looks like a hamburger there. Maybe not now, we won't talk about it, but we can talk about that for sure, right?
Yep.
Okay,
so that's that 3 stacked bars icon.
It's called the hamburger. So we're going to get into that.
Does
All right.
it standardize what channels each control surface goes on? Like
Yes.
Ailerons are 1 and 5.
you have the tier system, but this is channel 1 is not throttle in this case.
Right, it's
Correct.
AETR, always easy to remember. Aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder.
And you can change the default channel order under the system area, under sticks. And then here's the default channel order. You can also, this is where if you're flying European style, change it to mode 1. But now that's just changing it in the software. You still have to do a hardware change for mode 1.
Which means removing your back. Right. All right, so let's hit the other thing I want to point out, go back into the airplane, we'll go back into mixes. What's that little plus button in the top right there? What does that do?
We used to always tell people click on the plus button and they can never find it. It's in the top right here. They made the icon a little bit bigger, and that's for adding a new mix in. Let's say you have landing gear or lights or smoke or something else that it's not a default mix that it assigns during the model setup state.
Oh, you said landing gear. Let's set that up. I don't see landing gear on this list. I'm going to write to you, Ben, and say there's no landing gear.
Yep.
What are you going to tell me?
So pretty much simple mixes like landing gear, you can use the free mix. That's the most versatile mix. It allows you basically to do all the setup of pretty much the curves, the expo, the weights, and the output of that mix.
Okay. So
when you click on the free mix, it asks you where do you want to add it in the list. You can tell it either the first position, which is at the top of the list, the last position, which is the bottom of the list, or after a specific mix in the list as well. So in this case, I just usually put everything to the last position.
Okay, now we have a source right there.
Let me just change. So first thing I always like to do is change the name on the mix, because a lot of times you'll go through the setup process, get to the end and assign it to your output, and then your output is going to be named free mix, and then you have 4 outputs that are named free mix.
Right. Before you go any further, just want to point out he's showing landing gear because there's no landing gear set up, so he's creating a free mix to set up landing gear. And now he gave it a name, now we're going to select a source.
And see, previously on that, when we set up the flaps, it was called input, but now they call it source for the free mix. Okay. So, and usually you put that on this SF switch here.
Well, let's put it on a 3-position switch. It's a good time to talk about hamburgers. Let's put it on switch A.
Okay.
Okay. So we put it on a 3-position switch. Now I got a couple choices. I can change the switch A to a 2-position switch permanently in the hardware setup. But in this model, I'm going to set it up. You can see it's still a 3-position switch, right?
Yeah. So On the screen, I don't know if it shows up well up there.
The little hamburger right next, we see it says SA, and all the way to the left right there, it says there's a little hamburger. You click on that little hamburger.
Hold on.
And you
Click on that hamburger with the radio.
and the radio, right? So you put your finger on that.
I think you press and hold, right?
Yeah, so it's a long click, and you can do that two ways. You can either long click on the field itself directly, or I always have trouble, obviously, if you couldn't tell. I would just like to long press on the actual scroll wheel, and then that brings up the additional options for that field. In this case, it allows you to do negative, which is basically invert. So it will make it operate in the reverse position.
I have an easy way to explain this because people get confused about this all the time. It means anything but this position. So I remember this from high school where a gal told me, I'll date anyone but you. So this is what it means is that when switch A is active, it does one thing. And if anything other than switch A is active, it'll do something different.
Kind of, not here, but.
What? Okay, you explain it, Ben.
So, and for this particular case, it means it's actually inverting. It's inverting the switch function. So, normally at top you're going to be negative 100, middle is going to be 0, and bottom is going to be positive 100. What negative means is that at top position it's going to be positive 100, middle will be 0, and then bottom will be negative 100. It just
Basically invert.
It's basically the same as invert. I don't know why they call it different. Apparently, the dev wants to call things two different
that's right.
ways.
I'm kind of confused
Yeah.
with the not.
So,
To where, just say low rates or high rates, can you change that to where up is low rate or down is low rate?
yes, and that's what Steve was alluding to earlier, where basically
There's a not.
on the weights here, I'll go ahead and edit it, and normally everything pretty much defaults to always on. In this case, we're going to say the switch A position, and we want it to be in the up position will be the 100% rates, so high rates. I'm going to back out. I'm going to clone this, edit it, and say when switch A is middle position, that will be my mid rates, like 80%. I'm just throwing some numbers in here just to get some different stuff. And then you can add a third one as well for your low rates.
Have you already talked about what weights are?
We haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nobody knows what you're talking about.
Is this video going to be on YouTube? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And weights are the same thing as rates, what you're more familiar with your rates, your high rates, your mid rates, and your low rates.
Okay.
And so as you toggle through the different switch positions, you can see the graph as well reflects that it has less rate being output to that channel.
You see that, yeah. So let's get back out of here. Let's go back to, I want to go back to that mixer screen, go back into all those canned mixes. I want to point out a couple of the canned mixes, which I find to be kind of interesting. So the one I like to use is the aileron rudder mix. So the one right up at the top, right there, there we go. That one right there, usually put in the last position. What that does is, I have an actual airplane here to show this. When the plane is flying, when you make it a turn, what happens is that, typically what happens is the plane kind of turns outside of, turn this on, okay. When a plane is making a turn, sometimes it's not the most graceful turn. And what you need to do is whatever up aileron, you want to have the rudder kind of go into a little bit. So you can give it a percentage, so that right there at 20%, maybe give it a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending on your particular plane. What that does is it gives what they call the controlled turn, and you have a smoother turn. So that's one of the, I think, one of the ones that you play with. It's very beneficial. License, Marty, thanks. Okay, next one is, hit another one up there. And
Flaps to Ellie.
oh God, we get this all the time. So people will say, I put my flaps on, the plane balloons up, and then I have to save it and bring it back down again. Is there some way to fix that? So right there, the flap to elevator is a perfect one to play with. You put it in the last position, and you can input it, give it an input. You can have it always on.
Yeah.
So usually...
Usually you put it with your flaps switch as well, so SD.
Okay, there you go. And you can set a curve. The curve that comes with this, typically you don't want it to be something so radical because you want it to work around the same speed as your flaps. There we go.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to step back and say most people will come in here and assign it to the same switch as their flap switch. But if you put slow down and slow up on your flaps, it's not going to carry over to your flaps to LE mix. And you want your elevator mix to also have that same slow up, slow down as what you set for your flaps. So instead of using just the straight analog switch value, you can select the channel.
And choose a flap channel. It doesn't matter which flap channel it is. There it is.
I keep trying to use the up-down arrows, and that doesn't work.
Then that'll mirror the speed.
Exactly, yep. So
Yeah.
it uses whatever you've done to the flaps, it's going to use that same curve, that same slow up, slow down to make the elevator also not just jump up or jump down.
Yeah.
Wait, in fact, that's a good time. Let's go back to the flaps. I want to show them the slow up, slow down thing really quick. So the curves right there are giving, there's a certain amount of time. I typically like to give about 3.5 seconds.
So, and usually you want your slow down, you want your flaps to deploy slow, but you want them to come up faster because you don't want them to be.
There you go.
So I'm just going to say slow up, and then the slow down will be 3.5.
Right. Down is coming down, up is returning. I don't even slow up at 2 seconds is still a little fast for me, but a little slow for me. I usually use something like half second, 3/4 of a second.
Yeah.
But anyway, what we have here, can we show inside of the outputs what this looks like?
Yep. So I'm going to back out and go to the regular model setup area, and under the output screen, you can see your flaps 1. And so instead of just jumping, and you can see that it's also, as we apply the flaps, it's also giving that
elevator
25%,
compensation.
yeah, elevator compensation.
Right.
Does this act as a flight mode so that you can
This is not a flight mode. This is on everything.
in
Yeah.
flight
Yeah.
specific to the flaps?
Yeah,
Deploying flaps?
the way we showed it right now is just strictly based off the switch positions, but you can use this section, the flight mode section, and have your landing and takeoff different flight modes to control your different flap positions as well.
Right.
So that's totally independent then? So you just have to assign it as a switch that when you hit that switch, it's now becoming a flight mode, so it's additional step.
Exactly.
Right. Additional subs. Yeah. Perfect. All right. All right.
Did you want to show any of these other ones here?
I'm looking at them.
good?
There's a lot of these are specialized. Butterflies for like gliders, air brakes for turbine jets. Typically, you see those in. You want to talk about offset at all, or is that something a little complicated?
Most of the time, you shouldn't need offset, so I'm gonna.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Offset's simple. You know, it's just going to offset a channel value based off of some other switch position.
I got a question. If we're already set up ailerons, elevators, rudders, flaps, all these things, why are they here again?
Well, it just gives you the option to add them back in case you accidentally delete them or something like that.
You can also set them up for different flight modes, as Ron was just talking about. So you can have a separate somebody had this idea, and I loved it, which is he has his rudder set up, so when his landing gear is down, his rudder moves the wheel on his plane, so he can steer with it. But when it goes up, the rudder changes, and it becomes a rudder, so it doesn't control the landing gear. And those are two different flight modes.
So yeah, in this case, I'm going to basically choose the F switch, which we assign to the gear switch. So this would be gear down, and then when it's active, and then you can have this outputting to a secondary. Instead of your normal channel 4 rudder, it's going to output to channel 10, and you can control your nose wheel steering from channel 10.
That is pretty insane. So the benefit of that is, the idea is that you don't have to worry about it, the rudder turning inside of your plane as you're moving your rudder as you're flying. You can go from one to the other very quickly. Okay.
Is this simulator downloadable if you
It
don't
is.
have a radio yet, so that you can
Yes.
play with it to see if you're going to like that platform?
Exactly.
Yep.
So you can download the software. You don't even have to have a radio. Again, it is a little clunky to use, but they're working on improving the ability to do your the simulated sticks from another radio system. So you should be able to potentially use your current radio system, no matter what it is, to still at least simulate something within the radio.
Okay.
Or within the software.
We've shown how to set the radio up, give you some ideas about that. We've got the model set up. We got some mixes. We talked about some of the CAN mixes. Let's set up the RF system. We want to be able to bind your receiver to your transmitter.
So earlier you had asked about the registration ID. This is basically just a unique identifier. It's randomized for each radio, and that allows the radio and the receiver to have a two-way, basically binding phrase, so that the radio is only sending out packets destined for the receiver that it's registered to, and the receiver is only listening for packets that the radio that it was registered to is sending from.
So is it okay to use the same ID on different planes, or do you definitely want to change the ID there for each specific plane?
You would leave it alone for across the board for all your models, because if you change it plane to plane, you're going to have to re-register and rebind every time, because it needs to be consistent for each radio.
Right.
So let's say you buy 2 radio systems and you want to register and bind the same receivers easily. You can go to your first radio that you've already got models programmed on and set up on, write down the registration ID, and program your second radio to be the same registration ID, and then you can basically copy all your models over and not have to do the registration process again. Okay. You can switch the models from one radio to another just by redoing the bind, which is put it into bind mode and power up the receiver or the model.
So people ask about this. You can, owner ID registration, you can change it before you bind any receivers. If you go in afterwards and start changing, you have to re-register and rebind all your receivers. So you give it a name. I know what he's going to... Yeah, I like that name. All right, so...
I'm going to say Steve Sim.
Okay, perfect. Perfect, yeah, there we go. Now, registration and binding. People get confused about these things. What is a registration? What is a bind? What does this all mean? So we gave this radio a name. It's called Steve Sim now, or my transmitter is a name. And what we do is the registration process is kind of like registering at a hotel. In the first few minutes of registering at a hotel, they want to know a couple things about you. A, do you have money? B, what's your name? What's your address? What's your phone number? Do you have a car? Is it parked in our parking lot? Those kinds of things. So this is where information is shared, right? They're not assigning a room to you yet. They're just getting down the basics of it. So we're going through the registration process right now. As you can see, the registration process, what it's doing is it's sharing the name Steve Sim. That's going to be almost like branded onto the receiver. And the receiver in return is sending information back about what it is. It said it was an Archer receiver, and we are...
And the UID. So when you're connecting multiple receivers, so you want to make sure to increment the UID. For the first receiver will be 1, second receiver 2, third receiver 3, because you can get the telemetry coming back from all 3 receivers, and that's how the radio separates which receiver it's getting the telemetry data
Right.
from.
So the thing is that this registration process, we hold down what was once known as the bind key, the bind button, and you power on the receiver. First, you have to do is tell the transmitter, you hit the big registration button right there. Then as you power on your receiver and hold down the registration button, you'll get this pop up and it will give information. It will say registration okay. Once that's done, you don't have to do it again. So everything after this is when you bind, all you have to do is hit bind, plug it in, and it will... The transmitter will, the receiver says, I'm here. The transmitter said, I remember you. Are you on this model? And it says, yeah, okay, I'm going to assign you to that model. That's basically what the process is about.
So, basically what I'm just showing here is that if you have a receiver bound and you're like, oh no, I didn't want that to be my primary receiver, you can come in here and reset the bind on each of them, and you don't need to re-register because you've already done the registration process once. You can just shuffle them around by doing the bind process.
Now, I try to remember in the simulator, does it show once it's done there, can you go in there and look at the options? Options, yep, there it is.
I don't think it will. I don't think it does.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, actually it does.
Wow.
They fixed that.
They fixed that. This is cool. Look at this. What we did. Now, this is some stuff that people get confused about all the time. Telemetry is off. You can turn telemetry on. We usually turn it on in the telemetry section. This thing where it says telemetry 25 milliwatts, what that means is that that's actually turning the power down. So there are a few receivers, notably the high-tech HS645MG, that starts to jitter a bit. It does not like 900 megahertz telemetry. So what we do is we turn it down to 25 milliwatts in that particular case, right? You do not want to turn that on by default because you're putting out less telemetry power. So it's the last thing you should work on before you...
And just to touch on what high PWM speed, we get asked about that a lot. If you're using any analog servos, do not turn on high PWM speed. It's only for digital servos. If you're running all digital servos, you can turn on high PWM speed, and that just basically increases the data transmission rate that it talks to the digital servos with. Okay.
The telemetry port by default is F port, but you can change it to S port. These are S ports and older. That was our first telemetry.
Yeah. So another thing we get asked quite a lot about is Sbus and Smart Port and Fbus and what the difference is between them all. So Sbus is your control link, your control channels only. So your 16 channels of control. It's from the radio to the receiver only. Smart Port was telemetry data, so it's bidirectional. The radio is telling the receiver stuff, receiver is sending data back about its status. With Fbus, it combines both Sbus and Smart Port into a single line, so both your control link and your telemetry data is one wire connection and goes back and forth.
To reiterate, Sbus is 3 cables. It's the 3 cables, so you've got power, ground, and signal. And then Smart Port was a 4th one that went in that had to go into another channel. With Fbus, it's just on one 3 cable servo wire.
And then also with most of the modern receivers we have, the ACCST receivers do not support the pin reconfiguration, and some of the newer receivers have a little bit limited options. But you can come in here and say, for example, on pin 1, output Sbus. So I'll scroll down to the bottom. Let's see if it has the option here. No, they don't have it in the simulator. But some receivers will allow you to put Sbus out on one of the pins or Sbus in. Sbus in is used for receiver redundancy, so you would have Sbus coming out of one receiver and Sbus going into another receiver. So when you have your satellite receiver set up, that's how you connect them, is through pin 1.
Yep. Okay. That's handled. All right, let's move on to, let's go on to the next section here. Range check. That is highly important. Two things, fail-safe and range check. We should talk. So range check, what it's doing right now is you turn this on, what happens is the transmitter puts out 1/30 of the power. And then what you're supposed to do is move away. You put your plane up about 5 feet off the ground, and you move away from it, and you should have your transmitter pointed towards your plane. I usually say you get about 200 feet on 2.4 gigahertz. That's a pretty good sign that you have very good range. You want to make sure that the 900 megahertz is still going solid. Can you say that one more time on the range check?
Yeah. Yeah, so at 200 feet times 30 for 1/30 the power, that's about 6,000 feet, which is about a mile.
So that looks good. Yeah, and then...
And failsafe is always going to default to being not set because it's just the safest option. Failsafe is one of those tricky things where there's different mentalities of how you want to set your failsafe. Some people want, or most people are used to having just a receiver hold. But hold, if you go into failsafe, is obviously could potentially crash your airplane. Some people using stabilized receivers try to have it go into self-level mode with low to mid throttle and some right rudder to hopefully get it to spin down and land pretty flat. Other people say the safest thing is to just have it send no pulses and just get the plane on the ground as quickly as possible, regardless of what happens. So there's a few different approaches to setting failsafe depending on what kind of plane you're flying and how safe the plane is to either continue flying when you have no control or whether the safest option is just to let it go into the ground.
Yeah. All right, let's get out of here. All right. People ask about if we should talk about outputs or we want to do trims.
Whichever one you want to go to first.
All right, so let's go to outputs. So this is outputs. Now, it's going to be hard to do on a simulator. Typically, when you look on the radio, when you move the sticks around, you'll see the ailerons move and everything else.
Yeah,
and people ask about where do I set my subtrims? Where do I set? How would I do it? How would I set the subtrims on aileron 1?
So under the output screen, you just click on the aileron 1. It gives you the option for your center subtrim, your minimum, maximum. You can also do your servo direction reversing here as well. So if you have a control surface that's not moving the right way, this is the best place to really adjust that.
And then with the minimum maximums, that you can set that so that it never, for example, if it's a flap servo, if it goes to a certain point, it starts to buzz. You can back it down here so it never gets to that point in the first place.
Yeah. And generally, that's going to be the first thing you set up before you start programming in your weights and your rates.
Yeah.
A lot of people will start to dial in the weights and the rates based off of the buzzing of the servos. But generally, you want to actually set at 100% rate the minimum and maximum so that that's the furthest that the servo will travel, and then look at your manual, if it comes with the manual, to see what the recommended deflection degrees or measurements are for your rates so that you can get the proper amount of throw for high or low rates.
That's the same thing as travel in open source?
Yes.
Okay. And then, also we should show, this is, I think, the most beautiful parts of it, where it says direction, normal, or reverse. Now it says reverse. It used to say invert, and people didn't know what that meant. That's how you reverse your servos.
Yep. And here, it does also allow you to program in different slow up, slow down, and curves as well under the outputs, but most of that is better done at the mixer level.
Yeah. Perfect. There we have all that. Let's go to trims. As you can see. Now, the steps where it says fine, I have people tell me like when you sit there and you're setting the trims and it's making sounds where after a certain point it gets so high only dogs can hear it. That means that you want to change fine to something else. The first thing I do is change it to coarse.
I usually go to medium first, and then.
Of course you do.
Yeah, I like to go in steps.
No, coarse.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then range is how much trim it will allow you to apply to that specific control surface.
And you see where it says move trim to subtrim right there? Can you explain that?
So we always had a lot of people that would trim out the radio and go, okay, now I want it to be centered. So that's what the move trim to subtrim does basically, is it sets whatever trim you've manually set during flying onto that outputs subtrim that you saw on this previous screen.